The biting autumn wind stung Dorothea James's tear-stained face as her father dragged her by the arm toward the makeshift auction block in Silver Creek, Montana. The year was 1876, and at 20 years old, Dorothea found herself clutching her 3-month-old daughter tightly to her chest, the infant's tiny whimpers nearly lost in the din of the bustling mining town. "Please, father," Dorothea begged, her voice breaking as she stumbled to keep pace with him. "You cannot do this. We're your family." Elijah James's weathered face remained impassive, hardened by years of drinking and disappointment. Once a respected rancher, he had gambled away their homestead, drowning his failures in whiskey until nothing remained but bitterness. "Family," he spat. "You've been nothing but trouble since your mother died. That bastard child of yours was the final straw. I've got debts to pay, and you two are my last assets." Dorothea pressed her daughter closer, trying to shield her from the curious and predatory gazes of the men gathering near the wooden platform. Her baby, whom she'd named Rose despite her father's refusal to acknowledge her, had been born after a traveling salesman had taken advantage of her innocence, then disappeared with the dawn. "At least separate us," she whispered desperately. "Rose might fetch a better price with a proper family." Her father's grip tightened painfully. "Too much trouble. You'll both go together cheaper that way." The crowd thickened as they approached the auction area, mostly rough-looking miners and traders. Dorothea's heart pounded as she searched the faces, finding no sympathy among them. Silver Creek had seen plenty of desperate situations since silver was discovered in the nearby mountains. But even here, the selling of a woman and her child was causing a stir. Sheriff Miller stood nearby, watching with uncomfortable resignation. Dorothea caught his eye, silently pleading for intervention, but he looked away. The law in these parts often bent to accommodate the needs of men with money or influence, and her father's gambling debts were owed to powerful people. "Got a special offer today, gentlemen," called out Lester Pike, the local auctioneer who normally dealt in livestock and mining equipment. "Young woman, healthy and strong, comes with an infant. 2 for the price of 1. Think of the possibilities: housekeeper, laundress, whatever suits your needs." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Dorothea felt her knees weaken. Rose began to cry more insistently, sensing her mother's distress. Dorothea gently bounced her, trying to soothe her while fighting back her own tears. "Starting bid at $50 for the pair," Pike announced. "35. Called out a grizzled miner whose leering gaze made Dorothea's skin crawl. "40, shouted another, a red-faced man who reeked of whiskey even from several yards away. As the bidding continued, Dorothea spotted a tall figure at the back of the crowd. Unlike the others, he stood straight and still, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, a brown leather vest over a clean white shirt, dark trousers tucked into well-worn boots. $60, called the miner. 65. Countered the drunk. The tall stranger moved forward, parting the crowd with quiet authority. As he came into full view, Dorothea could see he was younger than she first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. $100, he stated simply, his voice deep and clear. A hush fell over the crowd. $100 was more than generous for what was being offered. Lester Pike grinned widely. $100 once, twice, 110, the miner tried desperately. $150, the stranger countered immediately. This silenced even the most determined bidders. Pike looked around, waiting for another offer, but none came. "Sold. To the gentleman in the back." Dorothea's father released her arm, pushing her roughly toward the auction block. "She's all yours, mister. No refunds." The stranger approached, his blue eyes meeting Dorothea's for the first time. She saw something unexpected there, not lust or cruelty, but a calm determination. "My name is Jackson Thornton," he said quietly so only she could hear. "I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town." He glanced at the baby in her arms, then back at her frightened face. "You're both coming home with me." Dorothea stared at him, trying to discern his intentions. "Why?" she whispered. Instead of answering, he turned to Pike and handed over the money. "I'll need a bill of sale." Pike scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to him. "She's all yours, Thornton. Didn't know you were in the market for a woman." Jackson folded the paper and tucked it inside his vest. "I'm not. I'm in the market for what's right." He turned back to Dorothea. "My wagon's this way. Can you walk?" Still clutching Rose, Dorothea nodded numbly. As they moved away from the auction block, her father didn't even spare her a glance, already counting the money he'd received. Jackson led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 healthy-looking horses. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat before taking his place beside her and picking up the reins. "Why are you doing this?" Dorothea asked again as they pulled away from Silver Creek's Main Street. Jackson kept his eyes on the road ahead. "No decent man would leave a woman and baby to the likes of those men. But you paid good money for us." "I paid for your freedom, Miss James, Dorothea James," she replied. "And this is Rose," he nodded. "Miss James, I've seen enough injustice to last several lifetimes. When I rode into town this morning, buying a woman and her child wasn't exactly what I had planned." The wagon hit a rut in the road, and Dorothea instinctively held Rose tighter. "You said we're going to your ranch?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, I have a small homestead by the creek. It's not much, but there's a spare room where you and your daughter can stay until you decide what you want to do next." Dorothea studied his profile, searching for hidden motives. "And what will you expect in return, Mr. Thornton?" His mouth tightened slightly. "Nothing that you're imagining. You'll be safe there. You have my word." As they traveled farther from town, the mountains loomed larger on the horizon. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and approaching snow. Rose had finally fallen asleep, her tiny face peaceful despite the ordeal they'd just endured. "Have you lived here long?" Dorothea asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "About 5 years. Came west after the war." "The Civil War," he nodded. "Fought for the Union. Afterward, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He glanced at her. "What about you? You're not from around here originally, are you?" "St. Louis," she replied. "My father moved us here 2 years ago after my mother died. Said there were opportunities in the West." She gave a bitter laugh. "I suppose being sold at auction wasn't what she would have had in mind for my future." Jackson's hands tightened on the reins. No parent should sell their child. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills. Eventually, they crested a rise and Jackson pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Dorothea followed his gaze and saw a neat cabin nestled against the tree line, smoke curling from its chimney. A barn stood nearby with corrals holding several horses. A small creek meandered through the property, reflecting the late afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's home." Jackson clicked to the horses and they began their descent. "Mrs. Cooper comes by twice a week to help with cooking and cleaning. She's there now, you'll like her. She's got 6 children of her own, so she'll be able to help with the baby too." As they approached the cabin, Dorothea saw an older woman emerge from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's her now," Jackson said. "I should warn you, she's curious by nature." Mrs. Cooper waved enthusiastically as they pulled up. She was a plump, pleasant-looking woman with gray hair pulled into a neat bun. "Mr. Thornton." I wasn't expecting you back so soon. I've got stew on the stove and—" She stopped abruptly when she noticed Dorothea and the baby. Her eyes widened, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Well now, who do we have here?" Jackson jumped down from the wagon and moved to help Dorothea. "Mrs. Cooper, this is Miss Dorothea James and her daughter Rose. They'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Cooper's eyes darted between them, obviously bursting with questions, but she simply smiled and nodded. "Well then, I'd better set 2 more places for supper, and I'll need to make up the spare room." She approached Dorothea and peered at the sleeping baby. "What a beautiful child! How old is she?" 3 months, Dorothea replied, grateful for the woman's kindness. "Perfect age, still sweet but starting to get some personality." Mrs. Cooper turned to Jackson. "I'll get things ready inside. You two take your time." As she bustled back into the cabin, Dorothea turned to Jackson. "She seems nice." "She is. Nosy but nice." He hesitated, then added, "Miss James, I want you to understand something. You're not obligated to stay here. If you'd prefer to go somewhere else to relatives, perhaps I'll give you the money to do so." Dorothea looked down at Rose, then back at Jackson. "Mr. Thornton, I have no one else. My father was my only living relative, and he just sold me to pay his gambling debts. I have nowhere to go and no means to support myself and my daughter." She straightened her shoulders. "But I won't be a burden. I can cook, clean, so whatever you need to earn our keep." Jackson nodded. "We can talk about that later. For now, let's get you both settled and fed." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace providing warmth. Mrs. Cooper had already set a pot of stew to simmer, filling the air with a savory aroma that reminded Dorothea how long it had been since she'd eaten. "The spare room is through there," Jackson said, pointing to a doorway off the main room. "It's small, but it should be comfortable enough for you and Rose." Mrs. Cooper emerged from the room carrying fresh linens. "I'm just making up the bed now. There's a basin of water if you'd like to freshen up before supper." "Thank you," Dorothea said, feeling overwhelmed by their kindness after the cruelty she'd experienced that morning. The bedroom was indeed small, but clean and cozy, with a narrow bed, a small chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window. Mrs. Cooper had already placed a wooden crate lined with blankets next to the bed, a makeshift crib for Rose. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Cooper apologized, "but it'll do until Mr. Thornton can get proper furnishings for the little one." "It's perfect," Dorothea assured her, gently laying Rose in the crate. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "I can't thank you both enough." Mrs. Cooper patted her arm. "No need for thanks. Mr. Thornton is a good man with a kind heart, despite his gruff manner." She lowered her voice. "Lost his wife and baby during childbirth before he came west. Never remarried, keeps to himself mostly. But a good man through and through." Dorothea glanced toward the main room where she could hear Jackson moving about. "I'm sorry to hear that. Life is full of sorrows, child. But joys too if we keep our hearts open." Mrs. Cooper smiled. "Now I'll leave you to settle in. Supper will be ready soon." After washing her face and tidying her hair as best she could, Dorothea joined Jackson at the table. Mrs. Cooper had set out bowls of hearty beef stew with fresh bread on the side. "I've got to get home to my own family," Mrs. Cooper announced, untying her apron. "But I'll be back on Thursday as usual, unless you need me sooner." She looked meaningfully at Jackson. "Thursday is fine, Mrs. Cooper." "Thank you for everything." After she left, an awkward silence fell between them. Dorothea focused on her stew, trying not to eat too quickly despite her hunger. "Mrs. Cooper means well," Jackson said finally, "but she tends to mother everyone she meets." "I like her," Dorothea replied. "It's been a long time since anyone showed me kindness." Jackson frowned. "Your father, Was he always cruel? Dorothea finished for him. No, he changed after my mother died. Started drinking, gambling. We lost our home in St. Louis, so we came west. He took odd jobs, but mostly he drank away whatever he earned. She glanced toward the bedroom where Rose slept. When I found out I was expecting, he threatened to throw me out, but I had nowhere to go, so he let me stay for a price. I cooked, cleaned, mended clothes for extra money. And Rose's father, Dorothea's face hardened. A traveling salesman who sold my father some worthless mining equipment. He was charming, said all the right things. I was naive enough to believe him when he said he'd come back for me. Jackson nodded, understanding without judgment. Well, you're both safe now. You can stay as long as you need. I'll earn our keep, Dorothea insisted. I noticed your shirts need mending and I'm a good cook. We'll figure it all out tomorrow, Jackson said, rising from the table. You've had a long day. Get some rest. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with Rose sleeping beside her, Dorothea stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the day's events. That morning, she'd awakened in her father's shabby rented room, dreading another day of his drunken tirades. Now she was in a stranger's home, rescued from an unthinkable fate by a man she knew nothing about. Was Jackson Thornton truly as decent as he seemed, or did he have ulterior motives that would reveal themselves in time? She had no choice but to trust him for now, for Rose's sake, if not her own. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Dorothea pulled the blanket tighter around herself and her daughter and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next few days established a tentative routine. Jackson rose before dawn to tend to his horses and cattle, returning for breakfast that Dorothea prepared. She quickly took over the household duties, cleaning the cabin, washing clothes, and mending the pile of torn shirts and socks she discovered in a basket. Rose proved to be a good-natured baby, content to watch from her makeshift crib or the blanket Dorothea spread on the floor. Jackson kept his distance, polite but reserved. He answered Dorothea's questions about the ranch and the surrounding area, but volunteered little about himself. Still, she began to piece together his story from their brief conversations and Mrs. Cooper's occasional comments. He'd been a captain in the Union Army, had lost his wife and unborn child in Pennsylvania, and had come west to start fresh. He'd built the ranch himself, starting with just a few horses. Now he bred and trained some of the finest horses in the territory, selling them to the Army and to wealthy ranchers throughout Montana. On her fourth day at the ranch, Dorothea was hanging laundry outside when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Her heart raced, fearing her father had somehow tracked her down, but it was only a delivery wagon from town. "Morning, madam," the driver called, tipping his hat. "Got some deliveries for Mr. Thornton." Jackson emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Ted, right on time." "Got everything on your list," the man replied, jumping down from his seat, "including those special items you telegraphed about." They unloaded several crates and packages, which Jackson carried into the cabin. Dorothea followed, curious. "What's all this?" she asked as he set the last crate on the table. "Supplies," he replied simply, taking out a knife to pry open the first crate. Inside were bolts of fabric practical cotton in several colors. "I thought you might want to make some clothes for yourself and Rose," he explained, not meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Cooper mentioned you're handy with a needle." Dorothea touched the fabric, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." "But you've already done so much. There's more," he interrupted, opening another package to reveal a proper cradle, small but beautifully crafted. "For Rose, that crate can't be comfortable." Tears welled in Dorothea's eyes. "Mr. Thornton, Jackson," he corrected. If we're living under the same roof, you might as well use my given name. Jackson, she repeated. I don't know how to thank you. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's nothing, just practical necessities. But the last crate contained items that went beyond necessities: a porcelain doll for when Rose was older, a silver hairbrush and mirror set for Dorothea, and several books, including a collection of poetry by Tennyson. You mentioned you enjoy reading, he said when she opened the book. Thought you might like something besides my old farming almanacs. Dorothea held the book to her chest, deeply touched. I love Tennyson. My mother used to read his poems to me. For the first time since they'd met, Jackson smiled a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and reached his eyes. Good. Then I chose well. That evening, after Rose was asleep in her new cradle, Dorothea joined Jackson by the fireplace. He was carving a piece of wood, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small knife. What are you making? She asked, settling into the chair opposite his with her sewing. A horse for Rose, he replied. Nothing fancy, just something to play with when she's older. Dorothea watched him work for a moment. You're very kind to us, Jackson. I hope someday I can repay you properly. He kept his eyes on his carving. There's no debt between us, Dorothea. What I did, anyone with a conscience would have done. Not anyone, she disagreed. Most men in that crowd were bidding for very different reasons than rescue. His jaw tightened. Men like that aren't worth the air they breathe. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft scrape of Jackson's knife against wood. Tell me about your wife, Dorothea said suddenly, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry that was intrusive. Jackson's hand stilled. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he set down his carving. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in Pennsylvania, married right before the war started. I was gone for nearly 4 years. His voice was measured, as if reciting facts from a distant history. When I came back, things were different. I was different, but she stuck by me. We were going to start fresh, have a family. He paused, staring into the fire. She died giving birth to our son. He didn't survive either. I'm so sorry, Dorothea whispered. It was a long time ago, he said, picking up his carving again. Is that why you helped us? Because of them? Jackson considered her question. Maybe partly, but mostly because it was the right thing to do. He looked up at her. What about you? What were your dreams before life took this turn? Dorothea smiled sadly. Nothing grand, a home of my own, children, books, simple things. Simple things are often the most worthwhile, he observed. Rose's cry from the bedroom interrupted their conversation. Dorothea set aside her sewing and rose to tend to her daughter. She's probably hungry, she explained. I should feed her and get some sleep myself. Good night, Jackson. Good night, Dorothea. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. The mountains received their first dusting of snow, and mornings brought frost to the windows. Jackson spent his days preparing the ranch for winter, chopping and stacking firewood, mending fences, and ensuring the barn was properly sealed against the coming cold. Dorothea threw herself into making the cabin more comfortable. With the fabric Jackson had provided, she sewed new curtains for the windows and clothes for herself and Rose. She turned one of Jackson's old shirts into a warm dress for her daughter, who was growing rapidly. Mrs. Cooper continued her twice-weekly visits, bringing gossip from town along with fresh eggs and occasionally a pie or cake. From her, Dorothea learned that Jackson was well respected in the community, known for his fair dealings and his willingness to help neighbors in need. Folks were mighty curious when he brought you and the baby home, Mrs. Cooper confided one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together. Some unsavory rumors started flying, but the Reverend's wife set them straight. said Mr. Thornton was doing a Christian deed, taking in those in need. He is a good man, Dorothea agreed. Mrs. Cooper gave her a knowing look. He's different since you came. Smiles more. Even laughed the other day when little Rose grabbed his finger. First time I heard that man laugh in all the years I've known him. Dorothea felt her cheeks warm. He's been very kind to us. Mrs. Cooper murmured, a smile playing at her lips. Despite Mrs. Cooper's insinuations, Jackson maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite, increasingly friendly, but never presumptuous. Still, Dorothea found herself looking forward to their evening conversations by the fire after Rose was asleep. They discussed books, shared stories from their childhoods, and debated everything from politics to the best way to predict the weather. One evening in late November, Jackson returned from town with news. "Sheriff Miller says your father left Silver Creek," he told her as they sat down to supper. "Apparently, he headed south after losing his money in a poker game." Dorothea felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "I should feel something more, shouldn't I? He was my father after all." "You feel what you feel," Jackson replied. "There's no right way to respond to betrayal." She nodded, appreciating his understanding. "I'm relieved, honestly. I've been afraid he might show up here, demanding more money or trying to take Rose." "He won't," Jackson said firmly. "I'd never let that happen." The conviction in his voice warmed her more than the fire blazing in the hearth. As winter settled over the mountains, the world outside shrank to the boundaries of the ranch. Heavy snow made trips to town infrequent, and even Mrs. Cooper's visits became less regular. The three of them, Jackson, Dorothea, and Rose, formed their own small universe within the cabin's walls. On Christmas Eve, Jackson surprised Dorothea with a pine tree cut from the forest, which they decorated with strings of dried berries and paper stars she had cut from old newspapers. He presented Rose with a wooden rattle he had carved, and Dorothea with a beautiful woolen shawl in deep blue. "It matches your eyes," he said simply when she wrapped it around her shoulders. For him, she had secretly sewn a new shirt from the finest fabric she could find among what he had bought, and embroidered his initials on the pocket. "This is beautiful work," he said, running his fingers over the stitching. "I've never had anything so fine." "You've given us so much," she replied. It seemed a small way to say thank you. That night, as snow fell softly outside, they sat closer than usual by the fire. Rose slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. "You ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't come to the auction that day?" Dorothea asked quietly. Jackson's face darkened. "I try not to." "I do," she admitted. "Every time I look at Rose, every time I feel safe and warm here, I think about how different things could have been." She reached over and touched his hand. "You saved us, Jackson." He turned his hand over and clasped hers gently. "You've brought life back to this place, Dorothea. Before you came, it was just a house. Now it's a home again." They sat like that, hands joined, until the fire burned low. Neither spoke of the feelings growing between them, but both felt the shift in their relationship, like winter giving way to the first tentative promise of spring. January brought bitter cold and a blizzard that howled around the cabin for 3 days straight. They huddled inside, keeping the fire stoked day and night. Rose, now 6 months old and beginning to sit up on her own, delighted in the undivided attention of both adults. On the third night of the storm, Dorothea was awakened by Rose's frightened cry. The cabin was freezing. The fire must have died down too much. Wrapping her shawl around her nightdress, she hurried to check on her daughter. Rose's skin felt cool to the touch, and she was fussing uncomfortably. Dorothea picked her up, trying to warm her with her own body heat, but the room was simply too cold. Making a quick decision, she carried Rose into the main room, To her surprise, Jackson was already up, stoking the fire back to life. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "The temperature dropped suddenly," he explained. "I was worried about you too." "Rose is cold," Dorothea said, her teeth chattering. "The bedroom is like ice." Jackson frowned. "Bring her here by the fire. I'll get more blankets." He quickly built up the flames while Dorothea sat on the rug before the hearth, holding Rose close. Jackson returned with every blanket in the house, wrapping them around mother and child. "Better?" he asked, his face lined with concern. Dorothea nodded, though she was still shivering. Without hesitation, Jackson sat beside them and put his arm around her shoulders, adding his warmth to theirs. "This storm is worse than any I've seen since coming here," he said. "But we're safe. We have plenty of firewood and food. We'll weather it together." Dorothea leaned against him, too cold to worry about propriety. Rose settled between them, soothed by their combined warmth and the crackling fire. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," she said, wanting to hear his voice. "What was it like growing up there?" Jackson began to describe his childhood home, a small farm near Pittsburgh, with rolling hills and forests of oak and maple. He told her about fishing in the creek with his brothers, about his mother's garden and his father's woodworking shop. "It was a good place to be a boy," he said. "Free to explore, to climb trees and build forts. I always thought my own children would grow up there too." "What changed your mind?" Dorothea asked sleepily, comfortable now in the cocoon of warmth they'd created. "The war, at first, then losing Sarah and our son." He looked down at Rose, who had fallen asleep between them. "I couldn't stay where every street, every room held memories. I needed open spaces, mountains, sky, room to breathe again." Dorothea understood. "And have you found room to breathe?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Especially lately." They fell asleep there by the fire, the three of them huddled together against the howling storm. When Dorothea woke at dawn, she found herself leaning against Jackson's chest, his arm still protectively around her and Rose. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt completely safe. The blizzard eventually passed, leaving behind snowdrifts taller than a man. Jackson spent days digging paths to the barn and outbuildings. Dorothea watched from the window, admiring his strength and determination as he worked tirelessly to restore order to their snowed-in world. In the evenings, exhausted from battling the elements, he would sit by the fire while Dorothea massaged liniment into his sore muscles. These quiet moments of physical contact, innocent though they were, heightened the awareness between them. One night in early February, as they sat together after Rose was asleep, Jackson turned to her with unusual hesitation. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he began. Dorothea set aside her mending, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, spring will be here before we know it. I was wondering what your plans might be." She looked at him in confusion. "My plans? When I brought you here, I said you could stay until you decided what to do next." His voice was carefully neutral. "I wanted to know if you've made any decisions about your future." Dorothea felt as if the floor had fallen away beneath her. In the months they'd lived together, she had come to think of the ranch as home, of Jackson as what? Not quite a husband, but more than a benefactor. Something unnamed but precious. "Are you asking me to leave?" she whispered. "No," Jackson said quickly, reaching for her hand. "God, no, I'm asking." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you want to stay permanently." "As what?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Color rose in Jackson's face. "As my wife, if you'll have me." Dorothea stared at him, speechless. "I know this isn't romantic," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "I should have courted you properly, taken you on drives, brought you flowers. But our situation is unusual and he stopped, gathering his thoughts. I care for you, Dorothea, deeply. And I love Rose as if she were my own, the thought of you both leaving. He shook his head. I don't want to lose you. Tears welled in Dorothea's eyes. Jackson, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take time to consider, it's a big decision. She squeezed his hand. I don't need time. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I would be honored to be your wife. The relief and joy that spread across Jackson's face made him look younger, almost boyish. Truly, truly, she affirmed. He leaned forward hesitantly, and Dorothea met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle and questioning, but the second was deeper, filled with months of unspoken longing. When they finally broke apart, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd find this again, a chance at happiness, at family. Nor did I, Dorothea admitted. After everything with my father, with Rose's father, I didn't trust men. But you're different, Jackson. You're good and kind and honorable. I'll try to be worthy of your trust, he promised. I'll be a good husband to you and a good father to Rose. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with Mrs. Cooper and her husband as witnesses. The Reverend was delighted to officiate, having heard the story of how they met. Rose, dressed in a new gown Dorothea had sewn, gurgled happily throughout the ceremony. I now pronounce you man and wife, the Reverend declared, beaming at them. Mr. Thornton, you may kiss your bride. Jackson's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of all that was to come. As they pulled apart, Dorothea saw tears in his eyes matching her own. Mrs. Thornton, he whispered, testing out the name. Dorothea smiled through her tears. It sounds perfect. Their wedding night was a revelation. Jackson was a gentle and considerate lover, mindful of Dorothea's limited experience. In the quiet darkness of what was now their bedroom, they discovered each other with wonder and growing passion. Dorothea, who had known only one hasty, painful encounter with Rose's father, found that physical love could be beautiful, tender, and deeply satisfying. Are you all right? Jackson asked as they lay entwined afterward. More than all right, she assured him, resting her head on his chest. I never knew it could be like this. He stroked her hair. It will only get better as we learn each other. Dorothea smiled in the darkness. I look forward to learning. As February turned to March, the snow began to melt, revealing the first tentative signs of spring. Jackson threw himself into preparing for the new season, planning which fields to plant, which mares to breed, which cattle to drive to market. Dorothea established her own routines as the mistress of the house, expanding the kitchen garden that had been neglected before her arrival. She planted vegetables, herbs, and flowers, determined to make the outside of their home as welcoming as the inside. Rose thrived, growing plumper and more active by the day. She crawled everywhere, exploring her world with fearless curiosity. Jackson built her a sturdy playpen for the kitchen, but she preferred to be where the action was, often in his lap as he did paperwork or clinging to Dorothea's skirts as she cooked. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dorothea made an announcement. I think Rose said her first word today, she told Jackson, who was bouncing the little girl on his knee. Really? What was it, Papa? Dorothea said, watching his reaction closely. She was watching you chop wood from the window, pointed and said Papa, clear as day. Jackson's hand stilled. Papa, he repeated softly. Is that all right? Dorothea asked. I've been calling you that when I talked to her about you. He looked down at Rose, who was reaching for his face with sticky fingers. It's more than all right, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It's perfect. He lifted Rose up to eye level. Can you say it again? Papa, Papa, Rose obliged, grinning toothlessly. Jackson laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. "That's right, little one, I'm your papa." Dorothea wiped away a tear. "You're a natural father, you know." "It's easy with her," he replied. "She makes it easy to love her." "Like mother, like daughter," Dorothea teased. Jackson pulled her close with his free arm. "Exactly like that." As spring bloomed into summer, the ranch flourished under their combined care. Jackson's horses fetched premium prices, and the crops Dorothea had planted yielded bountifully. They added 2 milk cows and expanded the chicken coop. Life was busy but deeply satisfying. Rose's first birthday in July was celebrated with a small party. Mrs. Cooper and her family came, along with a few neighboring ranchers and their children. Jackson presented his daughter, for that was how he thought of her now, with a beautifully crafted rocking horse, painted white with a real horsehair mane and tail. "She'll be riding a real one before we know it," he predicted as Rose squealed with delight at the gift. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Rose was asleep, Dorothea and Jackson sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they enjoyed the cool evening breeze. "I have something to tell you," Dorothea said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "We're going to have another baby." Jackson's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" She nodded. Mrs. Cooper confirmed it. "The baby should arrive in January." For a moment, Jackson sat perfectly still, and Dorothea saw a shadow of old grief cross his face. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "This is a gift," he whispered. "A second chance. Are you happy?" He lifted his head, and she saw that his eyes were wet. "Happier than I have any right to be." "We both deserve this happiness," Dorothea said firmly, "after everything." Jackson placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. We're already waiting for you." Dorothea covered his hand with her own. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" "Doesn't matter," he replied. "Healthy is all that matters." But later, as they lay in bed, Jackson confessed, "I've always wanted a son, but a daughter like Rose would be a blessing too." Dorothea snuggled closer. "Either way, this child will be loved. So very loved." The months of Dorothea's pregnancy passed in a blur of activity. Jackson insisted on hiring extra help for the harvest so she wouldn't overexert herself. A young man from town, Tommy Wilson, came to work the fields while Mrs. Cooper's eldest daughter helped with housework 3 days a week. Rose continued to develop rapidly, walking confidently and adding new words to her vocabulary daily. Her favorite word remained "papa," which she called out joyfully whenever Jackson appeared. By Christmas, Dorothea was heavy with child. Her pregnancy had been easier than with Rose, no morning sickness, just a comfortable, steady growth. Jackson treated her like precious glass, insisting she rest often and bringing her special treats from town. "You're spoiling me," she protested one evening as he massaged her swollen feet. "You're carrying our child," he replied simply. "You deserve to be spoiled." The baby arrived on a snowy night in mid-January, almost exactly a year after Jackson had proposed. The labor was shorter than with Rose, but still intense. Jackson refused to leave Dorothea's side, even when Mrs. Cooper, acting as midwife, suggested he wait outside as was traditional. "I lost one wife in childbirth," he said firmly. "I won't be separated from this one." His presence gave Dorothea strength. She gripped his hand through the worst of the pains, drawing comfort from his steady support. "You can do this," he murmured in her ear. "You're the strongest woman I know." After several hours, their son was born, a robust boy with a healthy cry and a shock of dark hair like his father's. "A boy," Mrs. Cooper announced triumphantly. "And a fine one at that." She cleaned the baby quickly and placed him in Dorothea's arms. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son with wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "What shall we name him?" Dorothea asked. Though they had discussed options for months, Jackson's eyes met hers. I was thinking William after my father. William James Thornton. William, Dorothea repeated, testing the name. The baby opened his eyes as if in response. I think he approves. After Mrs. Cooper left and the household settled into quiet, Jackson lay beside Dorothea on their bed, little William sleeping between them. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For giving me back everything I thought I'd lost forever. A wife, a family, hope. Dorothea touched his face tenderly. You did the same for me, remember? When you said you're both coming home with me, you changed our lives forever. Jackson kissed her gently. Best decision I ever made. The next morning, Rose was introduced to her baby brother. At first she regarded William with suspicion, but when he grasped her finger in his tiny fist, her face lit up with delight. Baby, she declared, a word she had recently mastered. My baby. That's right, sweetheart, Dorothea said. This is your brother William. Willie, Rose pronounced, unable to manage the full name. Jackson laughed. Willie it is, then. As winter gave way to spring once more, the Thornton family settled into their new rhythm. William proved to be an easy baby, nursing well and sleeping for blissfully long stretches. Rose appointed herself his official protector, constantly checking on him and bringing him toys he was far too young to appreciate. Jackson doted on both children equally. He spent hours rocking William to sleep while telling him stories about horses and cattle drives. With Rose, he was patient and playful, teaching her the names of flowers and birds as they walked the property together. One evening in late May, as the children slept and Dorothea and Jackson sat on the porch enjoying the mild night air, a rider appeared on the road leading to their home. Jackson tensed, reaching instinctively for the rifle he kept by the door. Visitors after dark were rare and not always welcome in this part of the country. As the rider drew closer, Dorothea gasped. Even in the fading light, there was something familiar about the slumped figure on the tired-looking horse. It can't be, she whispered. Jackson stood, positioning himself slightly in front of her. Stay back, he warned. But as the rider came into the yard, there was no mistaking the weathered face and stooped shoulders. It was Elijah James, Dorothea's father. Evening, he called, his voice raspy. Looking for my daughter, Dorothea James. Jackson's expression hardened. There's no Dorothea James here. My wife's name is Dorothea Thornton. Elijah squinted at them. So you married her. Good for you. He dismounted slowly, moving like a man twice his age. I ain't here to cause trouble. Just wanted to see her one last time. Why? Dorothea asked, stepping forward despite Jackson's protective arm. Why now, after all this time? Her father removed his hat, revealing hair that had gone completely gray. I'm dying, Dorothea. Consumption. Doctor in Billings says I've got months at most. Dorothea felt Jackson's arm tighten around her waist. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, surprised to find she meant it. Elijah nodded. Figured you might be. You always were too soft-hearted. He coughed, a terrible rattling sound. I've been a poor excuse for a father. What I did to you and the baby, there's no forgiveness for that. But I needed to see you before I go. Tell you I know what I did was wrong. Jackson's posture remained rigid. You sold your daughter and grandchild like cattle. I did, Elijah acknowledged. Worst sin of a sinful life. Been paying for it ever since. He looked directly at Dorothea. I don't expect your forgiveness, girl. Just wanted you to know I've lived with the shame of it. Dorothea studied her father's face. The cruel, domineering man who had terrified her for years looked shrunken now, diminished by illness and perhaps by remorse. Would you like to meet your grandchildren? She asked quietly. Jackson looked at her sharply. Dorothea, she touched his arm. It's all right, he can't hurt us now. Elijah's rheumy eyes widened. Children, You have another, Dorothea nodded. A son, William, he's 4 months old, and Rose is walking and talking now. I'd like that, Elijah said softly, to see them before I go. Jackson reluctantly invited him inside, but insisted he wash up first at the pump outside. Once clean and settled in a chair by the fire, Elijah looked less threatening, just a tired old man nearing the end of his journey. Dorothea brought Rose out first. The child hid behind her skirts, peering curiously at the stranger. "This is Rose," Dorothea said. "Rose, this is your grandfather." Elijah stared at the little girl with wonder. "She's the spitting image of you at that age, has your mother's eyes." Rose, never shy for long, eventually approached him with cautious curiosity. "You old," she announced. A rusty laugh escaped Elijah. "That I am, little one, old and getting older by the minute." When William woke for his evening feeding, Jackson brought him out, still holding the baby protectively. "Fine-looking boy," Elijah commented. "Takes after his father." "Thank you," Jackson replied, his tone slightly warmer. They offered Elijah supper, which he ate ravenously despite frequent coughing fits. As the evening wore on, it became clear he was too ill to travel further. "You can sleep in the barn," Jackson decided. "There's clean hay in the loft and blankets. We'll talk more in the morning." After Elijah retired for the night, Dorothea and Jackson discussed the situation in hushed tones. "I don't trust him," Jackson said bluntly. "After what he did, he could be here for money or worse." "He's dying," Dorothea replied. "You can see it in his face, hear it in his lungs." "I believe him about that, at least." Jackson sighed, pulling her close. "I won't let him hurt you again. I know." She rested her head on his shoulder. "But maybe this is a chance for closure for all of us." In the morning, they found Elijah had already risen and was sitting on the porch step, watching the sunrise. He looked even worse in daylight, gaunt and gray, with dark circles under his eyes. "Beautiful place you have here," he said as they joined him. "You've done well for yourself, daughter." "We have," Dorothea agreed, emphasizing the we. Elijah nodded, understanding. "I should move on, done what I came to do." "Where will you go?" Jackson asked. "Not sure. Been drifting since Silver Creek. Got a little money saved for a decent burial, at least." Jackson and Dorothea exchanged a glance. "You could stay," she offered hesitantly, until you can't travel anymore." Elijah looked surprised. "You do that, after everything, not in the house," Jackson clarified quickly. "But we have a small cabin by the creek, used for extra hands during roundup. It's basic but dry and warm enough." "Why would you help me?" Elijah asked, genuinely perplexed. Jackson's expression was unreadable. "Not for your sake, for Dorothea's, and for the children. They should know their grandfather, even briefly." Elijah stayed. The small cabin was made comfortable with a proper bed, a stove, and simple furnishings. At first he kept his distance from the main house, as if unsure of his welcome. But gradually, as his health permitted, he began to take short walks with Rose, teaching her to identify animal tracks and wildflowers. To everyone's surprise, he proved to have a genuine way with children. William, usually wary of strangers, would smile and coo when Elijah spoke to him. Rose brought him treasures, pretty stones, interesting leaves which he accepted with genuine appreciation. "You're good with them," Dorothea remarked one afternoon, watching her father whittle a tiny wooden animal for Rose. Elijah's hand stilled. "Should have been better with you," he said gruffly. "After your mother died, I just lost my way. Started seeing her in your face, hearing her in your voice. It hurt too much. So you drank to numb the pain," he nodded. "Weak man's solution. The drink made me mean to the one person I should have protected." He resumed his whittling. "Can't change the past, but I'm grateful for this time now." As summer progressed, Elijah's health deteriorated rapidly. By August, he was confined to his bed most days, his breathing labored and painful. Jackson sent for the doctor from Silver Creek, who confirmed what they already knew: the end was near. One evening, as Dorothea sat with her father while he drifted in and out of consciousness, he suddenly gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Been meaning to tell you," he rasped. "Your mother's jewelry, gold locket with her portrait inside, hid it in the lining of my saddlebag. Want you to have it." Tears filled Dorothea's eyes. "I thought you'd sold everything." He shook his head weakly. "Couldn't part with that. Only decent thing I did." After he fell asleep, Dorothea found Jackson in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. "He's not going to last the night," she said quietly. Jackson straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Do you want me to sit with you?" She nodded gratefully. "Please." They kept vigil together in the small cabin, Dorothea holding her father's hand as his breathing grew more labored. Near midnight, Elijah opened his eyes one last time. "Dorothy," he whispered, using his childhood nickname for her. "Forgive me." Dorothea squeezed his hand. "I forgive you, Father." A look of peace settled over his weathered features. He drew one more rattling breath, then was still. They buried him the next day on a hill overlooking the ranch, with the mountains visible in the distance. The Reverend came from Silver Creek to say a few words, and several neighbors attended out of respect for the Thorntons. "He wasn't a good father," Dorothea said to Jackson as they walked back to the house after the simple service. "But in the end, he tried to make amends. That counts for something." Jackson put his arm around her. "It does. And you gave him a gift. Few people deserve the chance to die with dignity and peace." In her father's saddlebag, Dorothea found the locket he had mentioned, a delicate gold oval with intricate engravings. Inside was a miniature portrait of her mother as a young woman, her smile gentle and her eyes kind. "She was beautiful," Jackson said, looking over her shoulder at the image. "Yes," Dorothea agreed. "And now I have something of hers to give to Rose someday." Life continued its steady rhythm on the Thornton ranch. William took his first steps at 10 months, determined to keep up with his sister. Rose, now 2, was talking in complete sentences and showing a remarkable affinity for horses, much to Jackson's delight. "She's a natural," he told Dorothea proudly after Rose's first pony ride. "Has perfect balance and no fear at all." "Like her father," Dorothea observed, watching Jackson lift their daughter off the gentle pony. "Speaking of fathers," Jackson said as they walked back to the house, "I've been thinking about Rose's birth certificate." Dorothea looked at him questioningly. "What about it?" "It lists father unknown. I'd like to change that. Legally adopt her, make her a Thornton in name as well as in fact." Tears welled in Dorothea's eyes. "You would do that?" "She is my daughter," Jackson said simply. "Has been since the day I brought you both home. I just want to make it official." The adoption was finalized in October. The judge in Silver Creek, familiar with their story, was happy to approve the petition. Rose Thornton became the legal daughter of Jackson Thornton, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. "Papa," she crowed when they explained in simple terms what had happened. "My papa forever." "That's right, sweetheart," Jackson affirmed, swinging her up onto his shoulders. "Forever and always." That Christmas, with snow blanketing the ranch in pristine white, the Thornton family celebrated in their cozy cabin. A pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with popcorn strings made by Rose and paper ornaments cut by Dorothea. William, now 11 months old, crawled enthusiastically from gift to gift, more interested in the colorful paper than the contents. "I have something special for you," Jackson told Dorothea after the children were asleep. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a silver bracelet with 4 charms: a horse, a house, and two small figures representing their children. "It's beautiful," she breathed, admiring the delicate craftsmanship. "I had it made in Billings," Jackson explained. "The jeweler can add more charms as our family grows." Dorothea looked up at him, a smile playing at her lips. "Are you suggesting something, Mr. Thornton?" He pulled her close. "I wouldn't be opposed to more children. This house could use a few more little feet running around." She pretended to consider. "Perhaps next year. William should be walking properly by then." Jackson kissed her deeply. "I love you, Dorothea Thornton, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied. "My rescuer, my husband, my heart." As they stood together in the warm glow of the fire, Dorothea thought about the journey that had brought them here from the auction block where her father had sold her, to this moment of perfect contentment. Life had taken unexpected turns, bringing sorrow and joy in equal measure. But here, in Jackson's arms with their children sleeping peacefully nearby, she knew she had found her true home at last. 5 years later, the Thornton ranch had grown considerably. Jackson's reputation as a horse breeder had spread throughout the territory, bringing wealthy buyers from as far away as Denver and San Francisco. The original cabin had been expanded to a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a study for Jackson's business affairs. Rose, now 7, was attending the small schoolhouse in Silver Creek, riding there on her own pony when weather permitted. William, at 5, was his father's shadow, absorbing everything about ranching with keen interest. They had been joined by a sister, Emma, now 3, and baby Thomas, just learning to crawl, on a warm spring evening as the children played in the yard under Mrs. Cooper's watchful eye. Jackson found Dorothea sitting on their new porch swing, her sewing forgotten in her lap as she gazed at the mountains. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. 10 years ago, I never could have imagined this life." Jackson took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed there 7 years before. "Any regrets?" "Not one," she assured him. "Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't come to Silver Creek that day, if you hadn't seen me at that auction block." He was quiet for a moment. "I've never told you why I was there. Weren't you buying supplies?" "That was the plan. But the night before, I had the strangest dream. I saw a woman holding a baby, surrounded by shadow. They were in trouble, and I knew I had to help." He shrugged, embarrassed. "I'm not usually one for dreams' importance, but it was so vivid. When I rode into town and heard about the auction, something compelled me to go look." Dorothea stared at him. "You never mentioned this before. Seemed too fanciful. But when I saw you standing there with Rose, I recognized you from the dream, knew I had to act." "Divine intervention," Dorothea murmured. "Maybe," Jackson conceded. "Or maybe some things are just meant to be." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter. Rose was teaching William how to do a cartwheel, while Emma watched with wide-eyed fascination. Baby Thomas crawled determinedly after a butterfly, undeterred by his limited mobility. "Either way," Dorothea said, "I'm grateful every day for whatever force brought you to that auction block." Jackson kissed her softly. "As am I, my love, as am I." The sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Another day was ending on the Thornton ranch, a day filled with work and laughter, challenges and joys. In the gathering dusk, the family would soon come together for supper, prayers, and bedtime stories. And in the quiet afterward, Dorothea and Jackson would share quiet moments by the fire, planning the future and counting their blessings. It was a good life, not perfect, but real and rich and hard-earned. A life built on a foundation of courage and kindness, of second chances and unwavering love. A life that had begun with 6 simple words spoken by a stranger with compassion in his heart. "You're both coming home with me."